everybody, Mike Iaconelli back out in the shop with another timely video for you today. And in today's shop, we're going to be going over the ins and outs of fall bass fishing. Fall fishing. I want to start by saying that I think people assume that fall fishing is just this one big category. It happens quick and it's over, and that's that. In fact, that's really far from the truth, guys. Fall fishing, fall bass fishing, in fact, is broken into 3 different stages, and it happens over a few months of the end of the year, right? It happens over a few month period. It's very complex. It definitely has more than just a couple weeks period. It's a long thing, and you have to be able to understand it. Because the one thing I can tell you about fall fishing, and you're going to see this as we flush it out, is the fish are continually moving, right? So it's a complex time of the year. But when you figure it out, when you figure out where they're at and how to trigger that bite in the fall, it can be some of the best fishing of the whole year. I can honestly say that some of the best days I've ever had in my life have happened in either the pre-spawn, that February, March, April, or the fall, October, November. That's a great time period as well. So let's talk about it. I'm going to go over it in each of these 3 sections. I'm going to talk about how they move, how they're moving, and then I'm going to show you a couple baits for each of those time frames and really try to give you an understanding that fall isn't as simple as a 1-week period, okay? All right, let's start with the first segment of fall fishing, which is the early fall period, okay? The early fall period. And here's a real easy way to talk about this early fall period, guys. And I don't care if you're watching this and you live in the Northeast like I do, or the Midwest, or the West Coast, or if you live in the South, if you live in the heat of the South, it's all the same. And the early fall period is triggered by falling water temperatures, falling air temperatures, right? It's triggered by this cool weather that starts to come in. So up here in the Northeast, it starts as early as September. Down in the South, it might not start till sometimes November or even December, right? So geographically where you live doesn't matter. You'll know it's this early fall period when the fish start moving, okay? So here's how you know. All summer it's been hot, you've had shorts on, you launched a boat, it's hot. Now it's September, October, November, you launched a boat and it's chilly. You've had a cool night. You have to put a jacket on, right? You drop your trolling motor, you look at the water temperature. It's not 80 anymore. You drop the trolling motor, you look at your water temperature, you've seen a decrease in surface temp, right? So it goes from the hottest temperature of the year and you start to see the water cooling off. Even in some places, if you look at the foliage, you're going to see the leaves changing. You're going to see the leaves turning brown, orange. You're going to see spots in the trees, right? And your days are shorter. That's your last sign. It's this early fall period. Your days are shorter. So we call this one the early fall period or early fall transition because fish will start transitioning. And where they're moving is they're moving from their summer locations to where they want to end up during the second period, which is the fall feed. Guys, this is a pretty easy one to watch and figure out because almost universally, fish are going to leave their main lake areas, the places they've been on the main lake or the main river channel, and they're going to start heading back into the creeks, the pockets, the coves, especially the creeks, pockets, and coves that have a run in the back or a drain. And what that means is when you look at your map, paper map, digital map, phone, When you look at a creek or a pocket and you say, there's a creek in a pocket, if it has fresh water draining in the back, specifically, they're the ones that I want. So they're moving into the pockets, the creeks, the coves, and they're also on places that don't have pockets or creeks or coves. They're going to start a movement onto the humps, the shoals, and the tops of the points, okay? So this movement begins. But because this movement happens over 2 to 4 weeks, right? It's going to happen over this gradual period of time. As the weather and water and air temperatures start to plummet, they start to move. So basically what I'm doing is, in my mind, I'm saying, where have these fish spent the summer? Oh yeah, look at this. There's a main lake point. They're deep off the end of that. Oh, look at this. Here's a main lake channel, river channel bend. That's where they summered. Then I look at that pocket or that cove or that creek, and I say, that's where they're going. And then, guys, simply all I do is follow the contours in to that pocket, creek, or cove, or follow the contours up to that hump or shoal, right? So because of this, in this early fall period, early fall transition, I want to use baits that cover a lot of water. I also want to use baits that mimic forage, okay? So in this early fall period, I tend to put down my jigs and my plastics that are on the bottom that imitate crawls or gobies or whatever. And I tend to use lures that mimic forage, whatever the prevalent forage is where you live. So in a lot of places I fish, it's shad, alewife, herring, stuff like that, right? Bluebacks. So I really tend to go toward bait fish oriented lures, but I want lures that cover water. So here's 3 of my favorites in that early fall period, guys, without a doubt. Number 1 is the good old spinnerbait. Guys, look at that thing. Is that a lure that imitates a school of bait fish or what? This is a Mullex half-ounce Vetnator spinnerbait. I've got a double willow configuration. It's white. It's got silver metal flake. I got a trailer hook on it. I can go down that break line from where they were at in the summer to where they're headed, and I can cover a lot of water. Because remember, water temperature, air temperature start dropping, the fish go, we got to go feed. And they start moving down those break lines, heading to that creek. So I'm covering a lot of water. So spinnerbait, 100% one of my top lures in the early fall period. Lipless vibration, no, it's not just for the springtime. It's a great early fall lure. Think about how much water I can cover with the lipless. I have a lot of control on depth. And last but not least, especially when I'm seeing activity on the top, if I'm seeing birds dive, if I'm seeing bait flicker on the way up and down these break lines, on cloudy and rainy days, top water can be great. I like the buzzbait or a lure that I can cover a lot of water. So a buzzbait, a Chapo by Berkley, also a great bait, okay? So early fall period, the early fall transition, fish moving from summer, heading back to the pockets, the creeks, the coves, heading onto the shoals and humps, fish that are moving. All right, next guys, now we're going to get into the middle time frame, the second period of fall fishing for bass. And this one is called the fall feed. And guys, this is the one that everybody talks about because it is some of the most incredible, predictable fishing of the year. Fish that have moved into the backs of these creeks and pockets and coves. Fish that have made their move onto the humps and shoals. And they're there for one reason, guys, and that is to eat, to feed up for the approaching winter. Let me stop and remind you, even if you live in South Louisiana, go Tigers, or if you live in Florida, or you live in South Texas or Southern California, and it's hot. It's all relative. Because in the fall, early fall transition, water's starting to cool off. Those fish know that hard times are coming. Even though it's not the Northeast winter, it's not a New York winter, it's still going to get cold. So fish want to feed up. So during this fall feed period, this is the middle time frame, fish have moved into the backs of the creeks, the pockets, the coves, onto the shoals and humps. They followed that forage. They followed their food source back there, and they're feeding like wolves. That's a good way to describe it, dude. They're eating and feeding. It's an amazing time of the year. And once again, specifically, I like the creeks and the pockets and the coves that have some kind of fresh run in the back, a little inflow. It seems that the bait fish really focus on those creeks more when they have a fresh run in them. When those fish are back there, guys, they're back there to eat. So my lure choices, so in this middle period, this fall feed, I found them. I know where they're at. I don't have to cover a lot of water. I literally go and just run the backs of pockets, running the backs of creeks, running the backs of coves. Run in, look around. Do I see fish busting? Do I see the bait? If I do, I fish. If I don't, I leave. Same thing with the humps and the shoals. I very much am looking for active signs of bait and fish. And before I get into lures, let me set the stage from a standpoint of temperature. Now, you look at those trees, now they're all turned, right? They're brown, they're yellow, they're red. Your leaves have changed if you're in the Midwest to Northeast. Your air temperature, now every morning you're waking up and you're putting a sweatshirt on. You're putting a jacket on for your boat run. You look at your temperature, now your temperature has really plummeted. Now it's in the 60s, right? It's in the low 70s if you're down south. It's in the 60s. It's even maybe approaching the upper 50s if you live in the north. So it's really gotten cold. These fish are feeding. And when I know where they're at that time of the year, once again, I want lures that imitate bait. This fall feed period, they tend to not eat very many crawfish. They tend to want to eat bait because there's more protein in that, right? Eating yellow perch or alewife or herring or shad, gobbling them up. That's what they want. They want a belly full of forage before it gets too cold. So I'm going to give you my top 3 during this period. Certainly, guys, the spinnerbait, the buzzbait, the rattle trap that we used in the fall transition, early fall transition, they still work. But I'm going to give you 3 more for this fall feed. And my number 1 bait during the fall feed, and I love this, guys, it's unbelievable, is a fluke. It is the old soft plastic jerk bait. Love a fluke in this fall feed. And 90% of the time, I try to match the color of that fluke to what they're feeding on. I'm going to give you a little hint here, guys. I don't have one with me, but if there's so much bait back there, sometimes you get into the back of that pocket and there's millions of shad, and you're throwing your shad-colored fluke and you're not getting a lot of bites and you know the bass are there. I'll switch to a chartreuse fluke, bright chartreuse. I'll switch to a bubblegum fluke, and it makes it stand out from all those other millions of shad. About 10% of the time I have to do that. But a shad-colored soft jerkbait, I love it. A topwater, I love. They're back there busting. But a topwater that I can work slower, right? Not the buzzbait and the chopo that we used in the transition, early fall period. But a jaywalker, a drift walker, a popper, right? Something that I can fish slower on the top because I know where the fish are at. And last but not least, guys, I want to make sure I show you this one is a swim bait. Love a swim bait in this fall feed. And I don't know if I can't think of a lure that does a better job of mimicking that forage than a swim bait. Of course, I love the boot tails, the 3-3s, the 4-3s, the 5-inch boot tail style swim baits. I love them. The brand new unrigged coal shad is a great one by Berkley. And I also love your pre-rigged swim baits. This is the Berkley Nessie. I tend to like the smaller sizes in the fall feed. So this is the 90. Even the 110 is a good one. So I love swim baits as well. So again, fall feed, middle period in the fall. This is when you're busting them. They're feeding. You could have some of the best days of the whole year during this period. All right, guys, let's keep going. And now we're going to get to the third and final segment, the third and final part of this fall time frame. And it is the late fall period or late fall transition. Guys, this one's going to be a lot easier to explain to you because we're going to follow those fish from the back of the pockets in the creeks and the coves. We're going to follow those fish from the humps and the shoals, and we're going to follow them back out to the main lake where they're going to winter. Okay? So let's put the temperature and everything in context, and then I'm going to show you this real easy roadmap to where we're going to find them. Okay, now we're in the late fall period, and a lot of places in the country, if you're Midwest to North, we're talking about October, November. If you're down south, this period sometimes is more like November, December, sometimes even in early January in really hot places. But in this late fall period, late fall transition, dude, it's almost winter. It's cold now. Now it's really cold. You launched a boat, dude, you're putting on your AFCO bibs for the run. It's cold. You see your breath in the morning. All the leaves have fallen off the trees. They're not even on the trees anymore. You drop your trolling motor, now your water temperature is really low. It has plummeted. It's not at its lowest point. That's going to happen in the winter, but it's really cooled off. Your water temperature's in the low 50s, upper 40s. If you're in the south, your water temperature's in the upper to mid 50s. It's colder water now, right? And the fish that we're feeding in that fall feed when it was so fun and so easy, they turn their heads around and they look out to the main lake and they say, boys, we got to head out to where we're going to winter. We got to hit the road. The bait leaves and they leave and they start going back out of those places. So here's the great part, guys. They're in transition just like they were in the early fall period. And guess what they're using? The same exact routes that they used coming into those places where you caught them in the fall feed, right? So guys, it's the same break lines. So when you look at a map and you see that main lake bluff where they're going to winter, and you look back and there's that pocket, and coming out of that pocket or that creek, there's a break line that follows the shore all the way to that bluff. That's that same break line, that same line they're going to use to come out of those places, okay? So just like the early transition, the early fall period, they're moving. They're just moving the other way. But in this period, we need search lures, just like we did in the early fall, to find the fish. And guys, in my opinion, there's no better time than this late fall period, late fall transition, than going to a crankbait. Because a crankbait, I can drop my trolling motor, I can come out of that pocket and start heading to that main lake bluff, and I can cover a ton of water and find where these fish are stopping, okay? The fish are going to stop on anything that breaks that contour line, right? So think about it. Steady 5 to 10 foot drop coming out of that pocket. Steady drop, steady drop. All of a sudden, you get to a part of that bank where a point sticks out, a secondary point, or a lone dock, or a pile of boulders, and it breaks the continuity of that static line, right? That's the places they're going to stop. So I'm looking with my graph, but certainly I can cover a lot of water with a crankbait and feel around for those special spots. The great thing about this late fall period, late fall transition, is when you find them, there's 10 or 15 of them on that spot. Many times in this late fall period, I'm cranking, by the way, two of my favorite crankbaits this time of the year. I like a more moderate to tighter wobble. The water's gotten cool, right? So I don't want a big crankbait that does that. I want a crankbait that does that. Two of my favorite crankbaits are the Dime 10, the Dime 6. I love them, the Dime 15, and a little bit deeper fisheries. But I'm throwing out there, I'm trying to make bottom contact. And many times when I'm throwing that crankbait in this late fall period, I'll find a key stump or a rock, or I'll find one little patch of grass that hasn't died off yet, and it's on a secondary point. And when I get that bite, as I'm reeling that fish in, I look down, dude, there's 5 of them behind them. There's 10 of them behind them. So a lot of schooling going on this time of the year. So my number one bait, without a doubt, guys, is a crankbait, especially when I'm trying to find them. But then my second favorite lure for this late fall transition, this late fall period, is a jig. All right, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. You just said the fall is about bait. The early fall transition and the fall feed is all about bait fish. But in the late fall, after that water temperature has plummeted, the fish start feeding more on the bottom again. And they start feeding more on the other types of forage. Gobies, dace, darters, chubs, crawfish, crustaceans, you know, all that stuff. They start feeding up heavy again on that because their diet habit has sort of changed. So my second favorite lure, especially when I feel like I've located that key spot on the way out, right? Secondary point, lone boulder, something like that. My secondary lure is a jig. You know, a flipping jig if you're around a piece of isolated cover like a dock or a log. But if you're around that deeper, isolated cover targets, it could be a lone stump or a little tiny patch of grass or a hard spot, a little clump of boulders. I love a football jig. Typically, a heavier jig, you know, a half ounce, sometimes even a 3/4 ounce, and I'll drag it and try to make contact with that cover in that area, right? So the jig comes back into play in the late fall period, the fall transition, fish moving out of the pockets and coves and creeks, fishing moving off of the shoals and the high spots, heading to where they're going to go spend the winter. And it really becomes this system that you can follow the fish in, fish are feeding, follow the fish out. Guys, the fall is not as simple as a 1-week period where it's easy as cake. It's a complex period with 3 distinct sections. Use these tips. Follow your water temperature. Use the signs of nature. Try these lures, and you'll really maximize the bite during these 3 distinct fall phases. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. We're talking fall bass fishing. It's complex, it's tricky, but it can be one of the best times of the year. If you like what you're hearing, if you like what you're seeing, hit the button. See it? Subscribe to the channel. When you subscribe, we're going to send you a notification on every new piece of content dropping. And guess what? That's 1 a week. If you're already subscribed, tell your fishing buddies, tell your club friends about Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube. We're here to help you become a better angler and hopefully give you some good information. Fall fishing, it can be a blast. Bye. Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli out in the shop. Thanks for watching. And if you like this video, you have to check out that one, and I hope you like them.